Run to the edge! Go! Go! Ryland, the living weapon, shouted, pushing the boy on his way. Tears streamed down the young boy's face, but still he ran up the incline, breathing heavily. Ryland turned, forming another metal shield on his right arm, and deflected the crossbow bolts coming at him as the assassins followed them up. Then he turned to run again, following the boy. He glimpsed something moving fast to the side and turned to see a giant cockroach as tall as his waist and double as wide, scuttling along parallel to them. Then he heard a loud screech from above and he looked up to see a bird. This was no normal bird, however. It was bigger than any he had seen, with a wingspan that covered the sun from his view. Its beak was as long as his arm, thin and razor sharp, and instead of feathers, it had scaly skin like a lizard. It looked at them, screeched again so loudly it hurt his ears, and then swooped down towards them. Simultaneously, the giant cockroach charged at them, and a bolt from the crossbow whizzed past his ear, barely missing him. They had no choice. He pushed himself harder, disconnecting from the metal plates on his arms as he did so, and then grabbed hold of the boy, heaving him up into the air. The boy shouted in surprise, but didn't struggle. Ryland ran as fast as he could, reaching the top of the cliff. "Hold your breath," he told the boy, and then with zero hesitation, he jumped. Several hours earlier, Ryland sat atop the horse easily as it casually walked down the path. He had spent a lot of his life on horseback, so he was very comfortable up there. The horse itself wasn't anything to write home about. It was a stocky and thick-set farm animal, and quite an old one at that. Ryland would be surprised if it could travel at anything faster than a trot, and he was not willing to test it out if he didn't need to. Despite the simpleness of the animal, it had been a godsend for him. Not too long ago he had been travelling with no horse and no shoes. Now he had both. The road he was on was made of dirt, but was quite wide, straight and flat, so he could see clearly that the wagon slightly ahead of him had come to a stop. As he got closer, he saw why. Sitting at the front of the simple wagon, which was covered by a cream-coloured rug, was a young boy holding onto the reins of the two horses which led it. He looked like his age had barely crossed into 2 digits, and he wore a good quality cloak. Next to the horses, standing on the ground, was an older man with grey hair and a grey beard, holding his hands up as he spoke to the half a dozen men who were blocking their way. Bandits, Ryland realised. "Please, we have given you money, just let us go," Ryland heard the old man pleading as he rode up beside the wagon. The bandits snickered. "I don't think so," one of them called out. Then his eyes moved to Ryland. "Oh, what do we have here?" Ryland saw that they were all armed with an assortment of weapons. 2 had daggers, 1 had a sword, 1 had a bow and arrow, 1 an axe, and 1 a spear. They seemed to be sharing 1 suit of armor between them, each with only 1 body part protected. The rest of them was covered in simple but thick hide clothing. "I'm just passing by," Ryland called out without even stopping his horse. "Not without paying the toll, you ain't." The bandit with the spear moved in front of him to block his way. Ryland sighed and pulled on the reins to bring the farm horse to a stop. It seemed happy to. "Toll?" Ryland asked. "I wasn't aware there were still tolls on the road since the fall of the Empire." "Here there is," the bandit with the bow and arrow said. Ryland glanced at the old man and boy. Both were looking on at the situation with fear in their eyes. "Did you pay the toll?" Ryland asked the man. He nodded. "Yes, but they want more." "You shut it," the axe bandit snapped. "Come on, pay up, lad. You don't want to make us wait." "Well, how much is this toll?" Ryland asked them. The bandits looked between themselves, seemingly communicating without words. Then one of them with a dagger spoke up. "1 silver." "1?" the old man exclaimed. "You asked me for 6 and still you want more." "6?" Ryland exclaimed. "And you gave it to them?" What else was I meant to do? The old man said defensively. Ryland shrugged. This. Then he launched himself off the horse, soaring through the air, before smashing his knee into the bandit with the spear. The bandit fell to the ground, unconscious, and Ryland scooped up the spear. The other bandits shouted and swore as they stumbled to collect themselves. The Axeman was the first to rush towards Ryland. Ryland ducked underneath the axe swing and smashed the spear shaft into the bandit's face with a crunch. Then he whipped the man in the side of the head, making him fall down. The bowman shot at Ryland, but Ryland jumped to the side. He had recently been shot with a couple of arrows. It was not an experience he was willing to repeat. He rushed forward and swiped the spear at the bowman's feet. The metal cracked against his shins and he let out a cry as he fell forward right into the spear shaft that Ryland was swinging upwards. Unsurprisingly, the other bandits hesitated, clutching their weapons tightly. Ryland smirked. You know, I've always wondered what it must be like to live the life of an outlaw. Let me try it. If you want to live, then you have to pay a toll. I think 6 silvers should suffice. Hand it over to my man over there. Ryland nodded his head at the old man who had been watching the whole fight, frozen in place, his mouth open. The bandit with the sword muttered something under his breath, but reached into his pocket nonetheless and took out a small bag. He tossed it over to the old man who caught it. Is that what you gave them? Ryland asked. Yes, the man nodded. Great, off you go then, shoo, he said to the bandits. The 3 of them practically fell over each other trying to get away, and the bowman and axeman both stumbled after them. The spearman still lay unconscious on the ground, but his fellow bandits didn't even give him a second look in their rush to escape. Ryland chuckled to himself as he watched them run across the fields. Sir, I cannot express how thankful we are to you, the old man said once they were gone. Ryland shrugged as he dropped the spear. I don't have any silver, so what else was there to do, he said. Let me fix that for you. The old man opened up the small bag, took out a shining silver coin, and handed it to Ryland. Seems to me you are too eager to part with your coin, Ryland said. Not eager, desperate, the old man explained. My name is John, and this is my grandson, Will. He gestured at the boy on the wagon. I'm Ryland. Well met, Ryland. We are simple merchants, just trying to get to Octan. Octan? It's pretty close by as far as I can remember. Ryland looked out in the distance to where a large cliff could be seen. Just past there, he pointed. Yes, John said. The issue is that as you saw, the roads are dangerous, and my son gave me Will to show him the merchant's life a little bit. He and Will's mother are waiting in Octan. If I cannot get Will back there safe and sound, it will be the ultimate shame for me. Please, you are clearly a proficient fighter. I will give you the rest of the silver in this bag if you guard us for the rest of the trip. Ryland was taken aback. Octan was less than a day's travel from here, and it seemed that these merchants had survived fine on their own so far. They definitely had the money to pay their way. But who was he to reject that much money? He had never had 6 silvers at the same time in his life. Deal, Ryland said with a smile. I am at your service. The air was generally clean, though Ryland would occasionally get a whiff of manure from the cultivated fields around him. It seemed apt, seeing as he was also starting to catch a sense of the bullshit coming from the mouths of John and Will. It hadn't started that way. As they travelled down the road side by side, John had been the one to start the conversation. You carry no weapons, he asked. I prefer to steal the weapons of my enemies, more of a challenge, Ryland said. John looked at him dubiously. An interesting strategy. Though I suppose I saw you do it, so who am I to judge? Ryland laughed. I'm joking. I am not carrying any weapons that you see, but fear not, I am capable of protecting you. I hope so, John said. You are a living weapon, aren't you? The boy, Will, said in a small voice. It was the first time that Ryland had heard him speak. What? Ryland asked him. I met a living weapon once, and my tutors used to teach me about them. The way you jumped off the horse and moved, and you have no weapon. You must be one. A merchant boy with a tutor who has met a living weapon before. Interesting, Ryland commented. My son has done very well for himself, John said quickly, and he married a woman of a minor noble house from the Empire. Will here has had a very fortunate upbringing. That is actually why we went on this trip, to teach him what being a travelling merchant is like. Show him the difficulties of the road. Right, boy? Oh, yes, Will said. John gave him a harsh stare and Will looked away, pretending to be particularly interested in some trees in the distance. I see, Ryland said thoughtfully. So where did you go on this trip? I'm assuming you left from Octan? Yes, we did. We went to Polewood and back again, of course. I see. That's quite far, Ryland said. And you have come across a lot of danger on the roads? Oh yes, John told him. Lots of outlaws and wolves and all sorts of threatening situations. I must say that the goal of having Will experience what the real world is like has been a resounding success. John let out a nervous chuckle. Interesting, Ryland said. I am also coming from Polewood, and I didn't come across any of these dangers you are talking about. Well, I did find some wolves, but that's because I went searching for them. John looked at him curiously. It's a long story, Ryland said with the wave of his hand. Point is, I am surprised you saw so much danger on the road from Polewood, and I didn't. Well, you are a dangerous man, John suggested. People, I suspect, are less likely to trouble you. Perhaps we also went a different way. There are lots of roads to Polewood, as they say. Who says that? Ryland asked. John looked surprised. Well, I do, I suppose. I'm curious then, if the roads were so dangerous, then why didn't you hire guards before? You must have passed many villages and towns. We had guards, John said, but they were killed on the road. At that, Ryland saw Will look down sadly. That seemed to be true at least. I'm sorry, did you at least do some good business? They do love their iron in Polewood. I hear that they pay above and beyond for it. I've never tried selling some myself, of course. Every merchant worth his coat knows about the iron prices in Polewood, John said confidently. Why do you think we have been able to survive without a guard for so long? We had money to spend for our safety. Ryland chuckled. Polewood lies upon an iron mine, John. I hate to say it, but it seems my suspicions are true. You have been lying to me. John's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Will suddenly pointed out into the fields. What's that? Ryland followed the boy's finger to where he could see something moving towards them across the grassy field. At first, he thought it might be a dog. It was brown and about the size of one. But as it grew closer, his eyes widened. It cannot be, he whispered. What is it? John said in a shaky voice. Go, fast as you can, go, Ryland cried. Now he would see just how fast his horse could go. He whipped the reins and pressed his heels into the horse, while John did the same with the horses leading the wagon. Amazingly, his dull grey horse took off galloping down the road, the wind rushing past Ryland's ears. He turned to look and realized that the wagon was no longer next to him. He turned back and saw the two horses straining against the weight of the wagon. In that short moment, he had already gone almost 10 times further than they had. Ryland cursed to himself, turned his horse around and galloped back. He looked to his right and saw the creature getting closer. Now he could see it in greater detail, and what he thought it had been was confirmed. Coming towards them at high speed was a giant cockroach. It was about as tall as his waist and wider than it was tall, with its body segmented into a plate armor-like shell. Its eyes were big and black. It had long thin antennae, and its downward-facing mouth clicked loudly as it scuttled along. Stop! Ryland yelled as he reached the wagon. John pulled on the reins. Get rid of the wagon, get on the horses, go! Ryland ordered. What about you? John asked. I'll do my job. Ryland turned his horse around to face the creature. He knew of them. These cockroaches were not natural, of course, but made with magic. Magic that he knew very well. And there was one organization in particular who were known to use it in this way. The giant cockroach screeched loudly as two slimy wings sprouted from its back and started buzzing, raising it into the air. Ryland tapped into the power that was inside him and pushed a long black blade sharper than any steel weapon out from the palm of his hand. He gritted his teeth at the pain, but there was no time to worry about that now. The giant cockroach reached him, its pincer-like mouth snapping at him. He sliced at it, but at the last moment the cockroach dropped downwards, landing on the horse and burying its mandibles into the horse's neck. The horse neighed in pain and kicked upwards, flinging Ryland into the air. Ryland flew over the giant cockroach and landed hard on his back, the wind being knocked out of him. He turned to see the giant cockroach bite through the horse's neck, then turn its eyes to John and Will, who were still unlocking their horses from the wagon. "No you don't," Ryland muttered as he pushed himself up to his feet and ran towards the creature. He sliced its back, making a gash before it could get to John, and the creature turned on him and screeched. It jumped at him, but he dropped and rolled to the side, getting back to his feet and stabbing as it charged. His blade glanced off the side of its armored body, and then it spat a glob of black goo out of its mouth right at him. Ryland ducked to the side, managing to avoid most of the thick liquid, though some of it splashed onto his left cheek and shoulder. Immediately he screamed as the goo started burning its way through his skin. The giant cockroach launched at him again, claws on the end of its spindly legs reaching for him. He stabbed upwards, managing to get his blade perfectly between the two upper segments of its shell. The creature squealed as Ryland impaled it. Then with his other hand he drew another blade from his palm and shoved it right up the creature's mouth and out the top of its head. Its nerves went haywire, making its limbs violently vibrate, and then after a few seconds the giant cockroach grew still. He disconnected the blades from his palms, leaving them embedded in the creature as it dropped to the ground. Then he stumbled away towards the wagon that John had only now detached from the horses. Smoke was rising from Ryland's face and shoulder as the venom from the monstrosity burned through his flesh. "Water," he managed to mutter as he took a step towards the merchants. "Water." He collapsed to one knee, the pain he was feeling making his vision cloudy. Here, John said as he handed Ryland an already opened water skin. Ryland lifted it up and poured it over his face and shoulder. The pain somehow increased to the point that he almost fainted, but he forced himself to stay focused, and with his free hand, he rubbed at the venom until it unstuck from him and washed away. When it was all off, John helped him into a sitting position. "Oh my," John said as he looked at Ryland's injuries. Will was staring with his hands over his mouth. "Bad, huh?" Ryland said. He went to smirk, but the pain put a stop to it. John gulped. "I can see your teeth through your cheek." "Makes sense," Ryland grunted with effort. "That creature was made with fleshcraft. It is meant to be a weapon. Everything about it is deadly. Just like me." Ryland could already feel the stinging of his flesh knitting back together. Fleshcraft was used by the Empire to make human living weapons, but there are others who use it to make animal living weapons. "So John, tell me why the Order of Assassins is after a fake lowly merchant and his grandson." John pressed his lips together. "Fine. I suppose the jig is up. My name is not John, it is Alistair, and his name is not Will. It is Prince Wallace Strayhorn, heir to the Kingdom of Yellowscape. I was his father's steward." Ryland looked at the boy who stepped forward holding his head high, though Ryland could see he was forcing himself to try and look strong. "I've never heard of Yellowscape," Ryland commented. "It is relatively new. King Gregor, Wallace's father, seized the land not even 5 years ago after the Empire lost control of the area. It is where their city Gillington once stood, until Gregor razed it to the ground." "I see. It's not out of the question that someone might hire the Order to kill you, though the specific reason still escapes me. Recently, King Gregor, Wallace's father— You said that already, Ryland interrupted. Yes, John said dismissively. As I was saying, King Gregor was deposed by his wife, Queen Alison, and her lover, Lord Preston. They killed him and all who were loyal to him, and took over the kingdom. I managed to escape with the prince and a retinue of guards. At first we were making good progress, but then Queen Alison must have hired the Order. Not 2 days ago, all our guards were slaughtered. I thought posing as merchants might help us escape their notice. Clearly, I was wrong. Why do you want to get to Octan? Prince Wallace's uncle is chieftain there. He will protect Wallace and help him take back his father's kingdom. We are so close, but the Order knows where we are and where we are going. Nowhere is safe for us, but you have the skills to help us. I'm sorry I lied. It was to protect ourselves, but please, if you get us to Octan, we will pay you anything you want. Gold, land, titles. Please, you are our only hope. Ryland let out a sigh as he pushed himself to his feet. He wrinkled his mouth around and moved his shoulder. They weren't completely healed, but he was slowly getting back functionality. Your flesh, Prince Wallace said in amazement. It's growing back. One of the perks of being tortured as a child, I suppose, Ryland said dryly. The boy looked rather shocked by that answer, and his bewildered look made Ryland smile. The Order, huh? I always thought that if I had the choice, I would always avoid picking a fight with them. They are dangerous, and once they have a target, they will never stop, unless either the target is dead or the person who filled in the contract is dead. Once a contract is given, you can't even retract it. I know, Alistair said, which is why we have to get to Octan, raise the army, then march back to Yellowscape to kill Alison and Preston. Sounds difficult. Ryland looked at Wallace again, a boy who hadn't asked for this situation, but due to what life had thrown at him, here he was, being hunted by the most dangerous assassins in all the land. Will you help us? Alistair asked desperately. Well, you already hired me, didn't you? Ryland said. Let's get moving. I'm using one of the horses though. Prince Wallace, you ride with me. Ryland rode with the young prince in front of him. He would not allow the boy to be behind his back, as the Order could strike at any moment, from any direction, and he wanted to keep his eye on Wallace at all times. Alistair rode the other horse, both of them going at a trot, getting closer and closer to the cliff that stood before Octan. The road they had been travelling on turned from dirt to trodden grass, and the fields around them started getting wilder, with trees popping up, rarely at first, then getting more frequent. Is it true what you said about torture? The prince asked. You were tortured as a child? Ryland grimaced. Yes, although the Imperial alchemists wouldn't say it was torture. It is what I had to go through to become a living weapon. Most children that go through it die. Back then, I wasn't sure if I was the lucky one, or they were. And now? Wallace asked. Ryland thought for a moment. Until I die and see what lies beyond this life, I will never know. But if I do die and I see you in the afterlife, I will be sure to tell you. Ryland meant it as a joke, but Wallace did not laugh. Do you think I will die here? Can you really stop the Order assassins? He asked, somewhat sadly. I won't lie to you. I am not sure. I have never heard of anyone that has survived a contract on them by the Order. But there is a first time for everything, and I have sworn to fulfill my job of protecting you. So if you are going to die, that would mean they have already killed me. And to be honest, I quite like my life now. My father used to tell me that a king must not be afraid of death. He should welcome it as a long-lost sibling, yet never seek it, because it will come when it's ready. That is certainly a strong opinion, Ryland responded, mulling the words over in his mind. They soon reached the bottom of the cliff and stopped. Which way? Alistair asked Ryland. I have never been here before. Ryland looked left where the land looked sparse, but he knew around the cliff was a smelly marshland. And then he looked to the right, which he knew to be a forest. However, the land was firmer and he had travelled that way before. If what he had heard about the Order was true, then likely assassins would be waiting in both places. The one way they wouldn't expect is for them to scale the cliff, but obviously that would be foolish. He knew that on the other side was a sheer drop right into the river below. The interesting thing was that the river flowed straight past the west gate of Octan. A crazy thought entered Ryland's mind, but he quickly discarded it. "Let's go left. I have had my fill of forests of late," he said. He had just turned his horse in that direction when he glimpsed a flash from behind a tree. "Get down," he shouted, and he ducked his head low, pushing Wallace forward as he did. The crossbow bolt that he had barely glimpsed whistled just over his head. He looked up quickly, searching, and then saw a man dressed in all black with his face covered step out from behind the tree and shoot the crossbow again. This time the bolt slammed into the horse below Ryland. He grabbed hold of Wallace and leaped off the horse as it collapsed, managing to land on his feet, holding the boy up so he didn't get hurt. He then pushed Wallace towards Alistair, who was still on his horse. "Take him," Ryland said, but as Alistair reached out for the prince, a bolt pierced through his chest. He gasped and sat up straight as if he had been whipped, and then slowly, he slid off the horse. "Alistair!" Will shouted and rushed towards the former steward. "Damn it," Ryland muttered as he turned back to the assassin who had stepped forward, crossbow pointed at Will. He shot and Ryland stepped in front quickly, lifting his arm as metal burst out of it and formed into a circular shield. The bolt hit the metal and skidded away. He heard the snap of a twig and turned to see a second assassin, also with a crossbow, shoot at Ryland. Ryland ducked it, but then the first assassin shot again, and this one sliced the side of his leg. Ryland grunted in pain, ran over to Wallace, who was crying over Alistair's body, and grabbed his arm. "Come on," Ryland yelled. The only reason the next two bolts didn't hit either of them was because they got behind the remaining horse just in time. It too fell as Ryland pulled Wallace up the hill. "Run to the edge! Go, go!" Ryland shouted, pushing Wallace on his way. Tears streamed down the prince's face, but still he ran up the incline, breathing heavily. Ryland turned, forming another metal shield on his right arm, and deflected the bolts coming at him as the assassins followed them up. Then he turned to run again, following Wallace. He glimpsed something moving fast to the side and turned to see another giant cockroach scuttling along parallel to them. Then he heard a loud screech from above, and he looked up to see a bird. This was no normal bird, however. It was bigger than any he had seen, with a wingspan that covered the sun from his view. Its beak was as long as his arm, thin and razor sharp, and instead of feathers, it had scaly skin like a lizard. It looked at them, screeched again so loudly it hurt his ears, and then swooped down towards them. Simultaneously, the giant cockroach scuttled at them, and the crossbow bolt whizzed past his ear, barely missing him. They had no choice. He pushed himself harder, disconnecting from the metal plates on his arm as he did so, and then he reached down and heaved Wallace up into the air. Wallace shouted in surprise, but didn't struggle. Ryland ran as fast as he could, reaching the top of the cliff. "Hold your breath," he said, and then with zero hesitation, he jumped. The water came up to meet him fast, and before Ryland knew it, he was submerged, the cold pricking into him like 1,000 frozen needles. He thrashed around, kicking his legs until his head broke the surface of the water, and he gulped in a big, deep breath. He looked around desperately, searching for Wallace. His heart skipped a beat when he didn't see him at first, but then he saw the boy's head break the surface just a few yards away. "You can swim, right?" Ryland yelled. He had forgotten to ask. "Yes." "Just let the current take you. It will get us to Octan." "Okay." Ryland kicked his legs gently, keeping his head above the surface of the water but allowing the current to guide him down the river. It was relatively gentle, but they were moving with good speed. This would bring them right by the western gate, and then, all being well, they could get inside the city before the Order caught up with them. Hope was starting to ignite inside him. That's when he heard the screech from above. Looking up, he saw the lizard-like bird soaring through the sky. It let out another screech, folded its wings, then dived towards them like an aerial predator hunting its prey. No, it wasn't diving towards them, he realized. It was diving towards the prince. Ryland grew a rounded metal pole out of his shoulder. Then halfway, he switched it so the bottom half turned into a blade. Wallace screamed as the bird went straight for him, but then Ryland pulled the knife he had formed, disconnecting it from his shoulder, then threw it. It spun tip over hilt, perfectly balanced, until it plunged into the neck of the bird. With a yelp, the creature born of fleshcraft fell into the water. Ryland let out a sigh of relief as Wallace looked at him wide-eyed. They floated down the river until the city of Octan came into view. Closer and closer they got, and then eventually, when they were as close as they were going to get, Ryland told Wallace to swim to the edge. They were both wet and cold when they exited the river, and Wallace's teeth were chattering, but they were alive, and for Ryland that was more than a win. "Come on," he said to the prince, "almost there." The riverbank was muddy and slippery, and there was the strong smell of human waste in the air, likely runoff from the city. There were small fishing boats pulled up on shore with their nets hung out to dry, and flat stones and wooden posts, likely for beating and hanging laundry. Ahead of them, they could see the western gate, which was open and had several people traveling in and out. The sun was getting low in the sky, so he knew the gates would likely close soon, but they would hopefully get inside well before then. As they started to walk, Ryland looked at the tall wooden walls that surrounded the city. It had been a while since he had been to a city. There were people in the fields by the river, some were sitting and talking, some walking, and some farming. They all looked at Ryland and Wallace strangely when they passed. Ryland couldn't blame them. It was not every day you saw a fully clothed man and a boy dripping wet walking across the field. He heard a sniff from Wallace and turned to look at the boy. He assumed it was because he was cold, but then he saw that the young prince was crying. "Alistair, he is dead," Wallace explained when he saw Ryland looking at him. "He seemed like a good man." "He was. He saved my life." Ryland felt sorry for the boy. He was a prince, and being a prince came with a certain lifestyle. Even these men who styled themselves kings when they were little more than lords of certain large pieces of land, like Wallace's father, often had the money to spoil their children. Ryland wouldn't be surprised if Wallace had never experienced anything even remotely close to the difficulty that his journey from Yellowscape to Octan had likely been. When Ryland was a child, he hadn't been wealthy. Far from it. But even he, living in his small fishing village, had been protected from the difficulties of the world. At least, until he wasn't. A scream cut through the air from behind them, and both Ryland and Wallace turned to see a group of locals running in all directions. Between them was a giant cockroach, scuttling right towards them. God damn it. "Run!" Ryland and Wallace took off running towards the western gate, but the fleshcraft creature was too quick, and Ryland knew it. So he pushed the blade out of each of his palms. The giant cockroach gained on him quickly, opened its mouth, and spat out a big glob of its black, acidic venom. Ryland rolled to the side and then sliced at its legs as it passed him, cutting through them with ease. The creature collapsed to the ground and skidded along for a few yards from the momentum. Ryland wasted no time to jump on top of it and jam both blades through its head. Then he ran on, following Wallace, who was running ahead. He had the perfect view to see one of the assassins with a crossbow ahead of Wallace, aiming at him. "Wallace, stop!" Ryland shouted, and the boy did as he was told. The assassin had been aiming to hit a running target, so he had to readjust, and that moment was long enough for Ryland to catch up. When the bolt came flying, Ryland was there with a metal plate on his arm to block it. A second assassin came from the right and shot, and that bolt too, Ryland blocked. He stood up, keeping Wallace behind him as the two assassins circled him. "He's just a boy," Ryland called out. Have you no morals? Both assassins put away their crossbows and took out long, thin daggers, moving in tandem. He is a job, one of them called out through the black mask that covered her face. Then they both charged at the same time, crossing paths as they did so, attempting to confuse Ryland. Stay back, the living weapon said, but of course the assassins didn't listen. He met them, blade against blade. They were fast and well trained, but so was Ryland. He parried their strikes and kept moving, leading them away from Wallace. He blocked one dagger with his left blade as he delivered a kick to the knee of the other assassin. Then he sliced at the one he had blocked, but she jumped back. In one smooth motion, the assassin pulled out her crossbow again and shot. Ryland dodged, but too late did he realize that the bolt wasn't for him. He turned just in time to see the bolt pierce Wallace's chest. "Wallace!" Ryland shouted and ran to the boy. He knelt beside the body, but Wallace's breathing had already stopped. "No," Ryland said. He looked up angrily at the assassins, but they were gone, leaving him alone in the field holding the body of the dead prince. And that is how the guards from the city found him. The end. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this story. I really enjoyed writing it and narrating it for you. If you want to watch another story like this, then you can click this video that is somewhere on screen right now. AA Watson out.